putting this issue forward tonight and for securing Dáil time on what is a very important issue. Minister, I think it has to be borne in mind that of all the customers that we know who were wrongly denied a tracker mortgage rate, the vast majority of them still tonight, in January 2017, are still not being charged the correct rate. The tracker rate to which they are contractually entitled has still not been reinstated by their bank under the supervision of the central bank, and that is a scandal and that is a disgrace. There seems to be no urgency whatsoever in the central bank's handling of this issue and this investigation. And let's put it in real terms. If you have a family with a mortgage of €200,000 who are paying wrongly a variable rate of around 4%, and who should be paying a tracker rate of 1%, they are paying about €500 extra every single month in interest, more than they should be paying. So that is the reality of what we are talking about here. And for many of these customers, they have been paying that every single month, every year, for many years. So this is an enormous issue in the household budget of many thousands of houses across Ireland tonight. And I make the point about the lack of urgency, and I highlight one sentence for you. When the Central Bank issued an update on the 19th of December, they said at that time, based on current progress, we expect that relevant lenders will have identified and commenced engagement with impacted customers by mid-2017, with payment of redress and compensation, processing and consideration of any appeals, and the Central Bank's own assurance work continuing beyond this point for some lenders. So it could be many months yet before customers who we know are affected, who we know have been wrongly denied a tracker mortgage rate, are actually given that rate in their own mortgage. That is the position as of tonight. And when we look at correspondence that Bank of Ireland brought before the Oireachtas Finance Committee, they said, for example, that Bank of Ireland has completed phase 2 of the 4-phase Central Bank of Ireland tracker mortgage examination. This phase was submitted on schedule, they said, at the end of September 2016. No timelines have been provided to complete phases 3 and 4. No timelines have been provided by the Central Bank to the banks in terms of the aspects of this investigation that really matter to people, the reinstatement for them of the rate to which they are entitled. So that is the nub of this issue here and now. There is a much deeper and wider issue in terms of how this all happened, what exactly was known within the institutions, the nature of the redress that will be provided. But the priority has to be to ensure that those who are contractually entitled to a tracker mortgage rate are put on that rate without any further delay. And if you do anything, will you at least intervene and talk to the Central Bank about that issue and let them have the direct contact with the individual lenders to ensure that that happens without any further delay. You speak about the figure of 8,200 and the figure of 11,700, and we were in a position to reconcile those figures over the course of the hearing we had with Governor Lane just prior to Christmas. The 8,200 figure is the number of verified customers affected under the existing probe. But of course, we know that there were almost 1,400 customers in permanent TSB where permanent TSB put up their hands and eventually, after many years of procrastination, dealt with that issue by way of acknowledgement at least, even though it hasn't been fully dealt with in the case of individual mortgage holders, in 2015. So they are not included in the 8,200, but they are verified and they are confirmed. And equally, back in 2010, Bank of Ireland, following a review, identified 2,100 customers who were wrongly denied a tracker mortgage rate after having coming off a fixed rate. That is confirmed and verified and signed off. So while it is not part of this investigation, it is part of the issue at hand, which is customers being wrongly denied a tracker mortgage rate. And so when you add those up, the 8,200, the near 1,400 in respect of permanent TSB, the 2,100 in relation to Bank of Ireland, which does date back to 2010, that's how you arrive at the figure of 11,700. And when Deputy Doherty put it to Governor Lane at the meeting on the 20th of December, Could it be in the region of 15,000 customers affected? He didn't dissent. In fact, he acknowledged that it could be, but it is presently the figures that we have outlined there. So we know it's 11,700, but we don't have confirmation that many of the 15 lenders who were written to by the Central Bank as part of the probe have actually completed phases 1 and 2, that they have done a trawl of their mortgage accounts and that they have been in a position to confirm the number of affected customers. We don't know that as of now. The Oireachtas Finance Committee has done some very good work on this issue. In November and December we brought in the main lenders, AIB, Bank of Ireland, Permanent TSB, Ulster Bank, and we were in a position to go through this and other issues with them, and then we followed up on that with the meeting with the Governor before Christmas. And we are going to continue. It is a body of work which is far from complete, and we have made the decision as a committee, under the chairmanship of Deputy John McGuinness, that the Central Bank should come before us on a quarterly basis until we are satisfied that this issue has been dealt with. And so the next meeting with the Governor, as I understand it, will happen in the very early days of April of this year. And I welcome that, because the engagement we had before Christmas was not satisfactory. To be fair, I think the Governor and his officials didn't believe that the tracker issue was going to dominate the meeting, and it did dominate the meeting because of the information that we had gleaned from our engagement with the other banks. And so the Governor and his staff will be very clear before they come into the committee on the next occasion that the focus of our engagement will be on the tracker mortgage rate issue. There's a wider issue here, Minister, and it is about the statutory role of the Central Bank in relation to consumer protection. And I've made this point on many occasions. The Central Bank, in my view, is not adequately fulfilling its consumer protection role. And, perhaps the reason is that after the financial crash, that the immediate focus in strengthening and reforming our regulatory system was to ensure that prudential supervision was beefed up in terms of resources, a more intrusive style of supervision, for example. And I would like to think that that is happening. But certainly my observation is that in relation to consumer protection, the Central Bank is not in the Champions League. It's not playing Champions League football when it comes to consumer protection and protecting the statutory rights of the consumers of financial service products in Ireland today. And in many respects, the Central Bank is really in the spotlight on this one. And I acknowledge they levied a very significant fine on springboard mortgages in relation to the 1,372 customers that were affected by the PTSB springboard issue. And it remains to be seen what they do in relation to the possible enforcement proceedings that may follow subsequent to this investigation. And they do have to have the space to do their work. But we will be putting pressure on them to conclude that work, at least from the consumer perspective, as quickly as possible. There are other issues, Minister, that are relevant to all of this. I made the point that many customers who should be on a tracker rate tonight are not on a tracker rate. That has to be dealt with. There are other customers who are on the wrong rate. Bank of Ireland have acknowledged, in their case, a significant number of customers who are on the wrong rate and presumably are taking steps to correct that. But if you take the case of AIB, for example, the customers who they have identified as being affected by this issue are being put on a tracker rate of 3.67%. Now, that doesn't make any sense, because when you look at the actual contractual position, as I have done and others have done, if you look at the relevant mortgage contract for those customers, it's very clear, and I'm looking at the clause here, that at the end of the fixed rate period, the customer may choose between a further fixed interest rate period, conversion to a variable interest rate, or conversion to a tracker interest rate mortgage loan at the bank's then prevailing rates appropriate to the mortgage loan. And then it goes on in a further clause to clarify the nature of a tracker rate. It's made up of two parts, it says, in the contract. The ECB's main refinancing operations minimum bid rate, the ECB rate, which is variable, and a tracker margin as stated in Part 1 of the particulars of mortgage loan subject to 3.6.3 below. In other words, the only variable element of a tracker mortgage rate is the ECB base rate. That's the only variable element. So to suggest that customers who you now recognise should be on a tracker rate are going to be on ECB plus 3.67%, I mean, that's ridiculous. And at no time when tracker mortgages were being sold from the late 1990s up to around 2008, as I understand it, were people put on an ECB base rate plus 3.67%. And yet, when we put this to the central bank, they seem to be standing over that practice. I don't believe that that is accurate. And if that's how this issue is going to be handled, then it might as well just go to the courts. And the interpretation of those contractual rights will ultimately be determined in the court of law. And that shouldn't be the case. And there are groups of mortgage holders now who are being represented by solicitors, and make no mistake about it, if they have to vindicate their rights through legal recourse, then that's exactly what they will do. But they shouldn't have to do that. They really shouldn't have to do that because it's quite clear what the mortgage contract to which they are party and to which their financial institution is party, it's quite clear what it says. I gave the example there of AIB. Deputy Doherty a while ago gave the example of permanent TSB, and I think the rate is 3.25%, at least in some cases, in respect of that. Fundamentally, Minister, the probe here by the central bank has to get to the bottom of how this happened in the first place. I think in priority questions last week you used the phrase that it stretched the boundary of coincidence, that all the main lenders happened to make the same mistake. And they made the same mistake in the manner that was adverse to the customer, not favourable to the customer. And maybe that was coincidence. But why is it that this practice was widespread, that it was systemic? The Sinn Féin motion uses the word coordinated. I don't know if it was coordinated among the institutions. I don't have any evidence of that. But they did all happen to make the same mistake. So I certainly want the central bank to go into each of those institutions, to look at the minutes of the executive management committee meetings, to look at the minutes of the board meetings, to look at the internal memos, to look at the emails that went back and forth between the senior executives who were involved in this. And how did they react when they became aware of it? Because they didn't become aware of this today or yesterday. They became aware of this several years ago. And we know in the case of permanent TSB there was a very concerted effort through the work of the Financial Services Ombudsman, through the court process, to the very steps of the Supreme Court, to deny the blindingly obvious, to deny that customers who were entitled to a tracker rate would not get that rate. So the probe from the central bank, it has to be as forensic as that. They have to go in and find out exactly what happened. And when an awareness of this first occurred within the institutions, how did they deal with it? Was there a deliberate and conscious decision made to try to ride this out? Or is it that it was a genuine mistake? Was it a systems error? Was it? I don't know. I really don't know. But sometimes I just despair. Having come through what we came through in the financial crisis of 2008, having sat through the banking inquiry for nearly 2 years and looking in detail at the years leading up to that crisis, when the origin of that crisis was actually generated. And then I look at this and I wonder, perhaps the period overlaps, but have we actually learned anything? And have the authorities and the regulatory authorities in particular learned anything in respect of their approach? Now look, when it comes to the Director of Corporate Enforcement and the Gardaí, in our amendment to the motion, we haven't named them directly, because I'm of the view that the central bank has to do its work and it has to be led by the evidence. And if the evidence points to wrongdoing, which is criminal in nature, then absolutely the central bank has no option but to refer that matter to the Gardaí. And if there's any evidence whatsoever of a contravention of the Companies Acts, then they have to refer it to the Director of Corporate Enforcement. That's my perspective on this. I don't need to spell that out by way of the amendment that we have put forward, but it is certainly relevant. And on the issue of white-collar crime and the issue of whether or not there are significant deterrents in place, I think a review of our legislation in that area is well overdue. It doesn't have to be directly connected to the central bank investigation, but I think it is warranted. And I think when you look at the proceedings that have been taken against the individuals concerned, when you look at the length of time it has taken for cases to come to the courts, then you really would have to question the efficiency of it, Minister, the effectiveness of it. And I do believe that the Government should institute an independent review of our laws in that area as quickly as possible. Minister, the priority, as I said at the outset, is to ensure that those affected receive restitution as quickly as possible, that the Central Bank moves through the various stages now of its process to ensure that customers are treated fairly. We will do our job as elected representatives through the work of the Oireachtas Finance Committee to maintain the public spotlight on this issue and to maintain the spotlight of the Oireachtas indeed on this issue as well. I don't know how the voting on the various motions, the Sinn Féin motion, our amendment and your amendment, is going to work out, but it would be good if the Oireachtas could speak with some degree of unison on this issue, and if some agreement could be reached so that a motion does pass in respect of this, because there are strengths and weaknesses to the different motions that have been put forward. But what happened here, Minister, is nothing short of a disgrace. With each passing day, we are all getting individual stories of how it has affected people. And even the Central Bank acknowledges that perhaps up to 100 families have lost their homes directly as a result of this. Now, can you or I or any deputy in this House who hasn't gone through that trauma really understand the nature of that, what that does to a family, the devastation involved in that? We can't. And how can you compensate people who've lost their home, apart from providing them with another home that meets their needs? And for people who lost their home, then that's exactly what needs to be done. The banks have a duty to ensure that they have a home, and that they have a home that they can afford, because there's going to be some job of work to be done here to go back over each one of these mortgage accounts and see exactly what the level of compensation is. The direct reimbursement of money that was taken from people, and then compensation, and then added compensation where people have lost their home. And in conclusion, Lascian Corley, the advice that I would give to people is to do a trawl through their house, find their mortgage contract and have a good look at it. Particularly people who started off on a tracker rate, who went on to a fixed rate, perhaps in 2006, 7, 8, when the ECB base rate was climbing, and many people at that stage fixed for fear that their tracker rate was going to get out of control. And then subsequently, when their fixed rate ended, many people may be oblivious to it. They went straight back onto a variable rate, not knowing that they actually would have been entitled to a tracker rate. They should find their mortgage contract, they should read it and they should check it, and they should get independent financial advice on it if they believe that they may be affected. Because can we have any confidence, Minister, that the trawl being done by the individual institutions, that the supervision of the Central Bank is going to unearth all of the individual cases that have been affected? No, we can't. We thought Bank of Ireland, for example, disposed of this issue back in 2010, when they found 2,100 customers who were wrongly denied a tracker rate. And then we find out, in the course of this investigation, that actually no, they hadn't gotten to the bottom of it. There were many other customers who had been denied a tracker rate, and an even larger number, 3,916, who were put on the wrong rate, and 602 who were denied a tracker rate at all, and they weren't picked up in the original probe. So if there wasn't a subsequent probe by the central bank, would those customers ever have been identified? So that's my advice to customers. You can take nothing at face value. You can't trust that the investigations that the banks are doing will identify your case. You can't trust that the supervision of the central bank will deliver justice for you. You're going to have to go and fight for it yourself. And that's exactly what customers will do. And certainly from our perspective in Fianna Fáil, we will work with others collaboratively in this House and at the Oireachtas Committee to ensure that those affected get the justice they deserve. Thank you.